All right, let's pray. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere and fills all things, treasure your blessings and giver of life. Come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity and save our souls, O good one. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. To age ages. Amen.
Amen.
All right, good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Father.
So tonight, we're going to do the parable of the 10 virgins. And we've only got a couple left that we're going to do before we switch to our next topic, which just to give you guys a heads up on, I'm thinking of kind of shifting this a little bit into a book club type of class, where I'm going to expect you guys to read. And I'm going between right now on 2 ideas for books. Just see it out. So the first idea for a book, and I'm telling that to people who are listening online in the future, my first idea for a book, we might do both of these, but I'm either thinking of doing Father John Bear's The Mystery of Christ, which is a very good book, talking about the idea of the Christian journey and shaping oneself in the mindset of the crucified Christ. It's essentially like a summarized version of his Way of Nicaea, which is like that thick versus that thick. Okay? Anyway, that. Very good bit. And then the other one is For the Life of the World by Father Alexander Schmemann, which I think would actually tailor better with this class because of all the fact that we tailor this class not so much in, what do I always say, not so much in the actual parables, because everybody, their mother has already done the parables and broken it all down, and there's much better explanations, but how does it tailor to us as a community, and how do we use it for growth? Okay? So those are the 2, so start thinking about that now and everything. And if you have a preference, if you've read them, let me know. Well, don't tell me right now, Liam. But those are what I'm thinking, just so you know. So we only got a few more left of classes on this. Next week we don't have a class. I think we don't have class for 2 weeks because Christmas is a Wednesday. Or is it a Thursday?
I think it's Thursday.
Is it? Christmas Eve is a Wednesday. So we want to have class for 2 weeks. Keep that in mind. Okay? So I need somebody to read that's not Jesse because he always reads. Not Nate. You read 2 tonight. David, you want to read?
Yeah.
All right, come on up. You got to read loud. By the way, this is David.
Hey, David. Nice to meet you.
So, I have them read, say the gospel reading and the name of it and read the verse.
Gospel reading, Matthew 25, 1 through 13, the parable of the 10 virgins. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be compared to 10 maidens who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, Behold, the bridegroom! Come out to meet them. Then all those maidens rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise replied, Perhaps there will not be enough for us and for you. Go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterwards the other maidens came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he replied, Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.
Thank you. So, thoughts, questions, comments? Nate.
Actually, I have a few. So, number one, this one, and to me, it kind of links back to the parable where at the end Christ says, you fool, for tonight your soul is asked of you.
Right, the rich fool.
There was no sense of urgency with the foolish virgins. Number 2, it goes down to he who endureth to the end shall be saved. That they did not endure to the end, they're like without. And I have a third point that I've already lost in the weeds.
Okay. So, interesting that you bring up the rich fool. Because I was wondering if anyone was going to bring that up. So you get the gold star as of now.
Oh,
So you go home and tell Bree that, hey, I'm sorry I didn't talk to you and bring you to church. But, hey, Father gave me the gold star, so you can't be 100% mad at me, right?
that'll make it worse.
I know. That's why I told you to do that. I'm kidding. But it's interesting you bring up the rich fool, because we're going to talk about how that kind of is connected to this. Why do you think that the rich fool applies in this sense too, right? Tonight your soul needs you, right? Here we got virgins, right? Uses it really, yeah. That calling them, virgins, that's not the issue at hand, right? It's that the readiness is what we really want to talk about, right? We can talk about like the virginity. That's not really the point of this, though it does factor into this. But the readiness is what I want to talk about. Why is it so interesting that those two kind of fit, right? One's talking about readiness after many years, continuing readiness, and this one's talking about readiness now. Anybody want to jump in and give their thoughts? I will pick on people if you don't. Nothing?
I have somewhere I want to go with it.
Go ahead.
So what I'm thinking is both of them, the rich fool, he was prepared for a long, long time, but he left his foot off. I know where I'm going to go with this. The rich fool was doing great for a long, long time, and then took his foot off the gas.
Okay.
The virgins didn't put their foot on the gas because they thought that they had time down the road. They were going to get all the money, but they took their time for granted.
Yeah. What's interesting, though, is that you're kind of half right. You're right in everything you said. The part that you're, like, why I say you're half right is because half of them did put their foot on the gas when the time came. They were ready. It was the other 5 that didn't. Okay? And, like I said, it's interesting that you bring up this thing with regards to, the readiness and how one had taken his foot off the gas and the other had not. That's actually a really good analogy. I think about it from the perspective of, for many, many years, people have taken things for granted, especially in the church, right? We think about the history of the church and how people took for granted throughout the centuries that they had the church. They had this thing. Nobody was ever going to take it over. Nobody was ever going to conquer it, right? Nobody was ever going to try to step in and take over and tell them what to do. And yet, throughout history, that happened. Multiple times it happened where other countries or other religions came in and tried to tell the church what to do, or even the state would have conflicts with the church in that sense, and try to shape it whenever they got into their sort of comfortness of things, right? We think of a good example of that is when Constantinople fell. Right? That when Constantinople fell, that wasn't the first time that Constantinople had technically fallen. It had been attacked multiple times and conquered a number of times, right? And there's that. But there's the 1453 conquering of Constantinople that played such a big factor into it because it completely changed that country or that area, if you will, right? Because no longer was the Orthodox Church the bastion of Christianity throughout the East. Right? It had kind of seeped its way more east, if you will, right? Where Russia, in a sense of it, was the real bastion of orthodoxy, if you will. It wasn't really 100%. But for the sake of this, it was like you had for a good 400 years of people that lived in a country, in an area, that was essentially under another government that would tell them, essentially like enslaved them and sort of said, this is how you get to do things. We kind of get to call the shots. You're not really free to be the Orthodox Church throughout the Byzantine area, right? They were all under what is called the Roman Millet, right? They're all under a Millet. The Muslims essentially were the ones calling the shots. And yes, they could be Orthodox, they could be Christians, but they had to pay very high taxes and they had to worry about death, right? They had gotten kind of what's the word I'm looking for? What's that?
Complacent?
Not complacent, but the sense of it is like they because they had gotten used to the idea that the whole empire was Christian, they couldn't get used to the idea of an empire that wasn't Christian anymore. That's what I'm trying to say, right? And then you see the same thing happen again in Russia with a very particular revolution. It was the Bolshevik Revolution. Russia had gotten very complacent with their faith, right? Everybody was Orthodox. It was just part of being Russian, right? If you lived in Russia, you were Orthodox. Here's another thing about that, right? That a lot of people don't know is not only was that part of it, right? Everybody's family. And this is one of those little things. It's like if you're on Jeopardy and they ask you a question, this is not really a question to be asked, but kind of would be, right? Is Russia was one of the few countries prior to the Bolshevik Revolution, where almost every single person's family had a clergy or a monastic in their family. And I'm not like exaggerating that at all, right? It was almost like a shock. If you had a family of like because everyone had like 10 kids back then. If you had 10 kids back then and one of them to become a priest or a deacon or a bishop, and then one of those kids didn't also become a monk, okay? That would be very odd if you had a family that large. Very odd. Very weird. And I'm really emphasizing that weirdness because that's how much it was, right? Like, they had gotten very complacent in that sense, right? And eventually what ended up happening when the Bolsheviks took over and made the whole country communist? The church had to react to that in another time in which now they had to sort of say, oh shoot, we took our foot off the gas, now what do we do? Right? And we saw throughout history what happened with that. We saw exactly what happened with that. In most instances, it actually was the best thing to happen to the church because it made the people in the church go, oh shoot, we don't hold on to this. Yes, Christ said the gates of hell will not overcome, right? He will not, the devil, bless you by the way, that the devil won't win, and the gates of hell will not overcome, and the gates of heaven will not be destroyed. I think I'm miswording it. It's been a long day, okay? I'm getting the verse wrong a little bit, but my point is like, Jesus said we won't lose this, right? But there have been times where we've gotten to the brink of that, and I would say that in some sense of it, we're at another time in history we're at the brink of that. Because we look at today's culture and society and everything going on. And, there's been all this kind of stuff coming out about how, the church is full of Russian agents and Russian assets. And I must have missed that class in seminary because I must have slept through that class. I don't know. Because I don't get a paycheck from that. That would be interesting if I did, But that the church is getting attacked because of this large growth we're experiencing in this country, right? What did I say a few weeks ago in one of my sermons, right? There are two religions in this country that are growing the fastest, right? Of the Christian religions, we're the fastest growing. Of the non-Christian religions, the Mormons are the fastest growing, okay? And they're outpacing us by a whole lot more because their foot is not on the gas. Their foot is on the gas. They're really actively trying to grow. We're, doing the same thing. We're just not as big as they are and not as organized as they are. And that's an issue we have to discuss, right? That's something that the church needs to do. That's not necessarily for this class, but it is something to think about, okay? But we are on sort of that cusp of it. Like, the church is getting attacked for that, right? And on top of that also, it's just like people looking at us going, We hear a lot of people say that we live in a post-Christian society, right? I've actually heard that we live in a post-religious society. The average person growing up nowadays has no religion whatsoever, right? We're talking like levels of what communism did to people in Russia and throughout all of Eastern Europe and even all the way into Western Europe, where the vast majority of people identify as either agnostic or nothing at all. Right? This sort of, they've got this they say they're a pro-science, but that means nothing because we're pro-science too, just a different perception of it, right? But there's so many people nowadays that identify and use that language of, I'm not even a Christian, I'm just a morally nice person, right? And all this kind of stuff. And the church is being attacked for that. It's seeing a resurgence, and what are they immediately going after? They're going after us for that. And I'm not just talking about us, just the Orthodox Church, I'm talking about Christianity in general. Right, is facing this. Because nowadays, today, you're considered, if you're not, part of that group, you're something else, right? You always get a term thrown at you. I'm not going to turn this into a left versus right thing, but I'm kind of turning this into a left versus right thing, It's like, in today's sort of society, and I saw this the other day, right, that when the left gets back into power, they're going to do all these types of things, and they're going to completely... Actually, I know what... Bless you. I remember what it was. It was somebody had posted something about the differences between the White House's video for Christmas and the Biden administrations and how differently contrasted they are and everything like that. And somebody had said something along the lines of, when the left gets back into power, you're going to expect more of those kind of videos again, right? And they're going to go into overdrive, right? Not to get on a too much of a tangent in that sense, but to say that there is a sort of sense in this country, especially today, that if you don't 100% abide by the religion of secularism and the state and what we like to call woke, right? If you're not on board with that 100%, then you're a blemish to society. And the church, as who was it who said this? That Christianity today is the counterculture to the counterculture, right? I can't remember who's the exact person who said that. I feel like it's Paul Joseph Lawson that might have said this, right? Is that this, because he likes to talk a lot about culture, counterculture, right? But the counterculture to the counterculture. Well, the culture that's accepted today is against all of this, because you're supposed to be on board with all of this. You're supposed to be on board with atheism and what we consider wrong. Like, if you're not what was it? I was accused of being a pro Skittles. I'm like, that's kind of a funny one. I didn't know they called that pro Skittles, right? I'm not. I'm like deeply anti-Skittles, right? I like Skittles, but it's not that kind of Skittles, right? But the pro-LGBT thing, right? If you're not somebody who's full-blown accepts that, if you're not somebody who puts their pronouns and tells people their pronouns and every little thing, and if you're not like, anti-racist and anti-bigoted and you're all these anti-things, if you're not part of that club, then you're not fit for society. And the church says, we don't care a crap about that. Our government, our God matters more. Our kingdom is in heaven. The world doesn't matter to us, and they don't like that. And that's the whole thing, right? Like, we're being attacked because they don't like that we're that way. They don't like that we look at the world completely different than they do. Because for them, that is their God. They have made that their God. They've made all of those identities and all of those things their God. And so we're reacting to that. And we're at a time with all this growth that's happening throughout this country, bless you again, where, we have to keep our foot on the gas, right? We can't just sit back and go, yep, we've got our churches, we'll be good to go, we'll get through this. No, because there's an activeness to get rid of us, right? They don't like the fact that we are a counter to the counterculture, right? Or that we're a counterculture to their culture. The society today does not like that. They want everybody to be on board with their touchy-feely sort of approach to everything. That feelings matter over facts. I feel like I'm quoting every single right-wing commentator, making it very clear that I am not a leftist. But that's not the point, right? That we're, we have to understand as the church, we can't just sit back, right? And I talk a lot about this. I've talked a lot about this over these last few weeks, right? About this idea that we have to go out there and show them what the church looks like, right? It's because of this very reason. Because we're at a time in our history where if we don't fight back against it, and I don't mean physically fight, of course. Let me be very careful on that. But if we don't fight back against that, we will only have ourselves to blame. And I'm going to end this on this last thing before I let everybody else jump in, because I know a few people had some comments they wanted to say on this, right? But I want to talk a little bit about a brief story that I had an interaction with another priest. I won't name him for the sake of this. Actually, I'm going to call him Father Nate for the sake of argument. Just kidding. I'm teasing, Those who are listening, someone said to me the other day, sorry, on a side note, said to me, why do you pick on Nate so much? I'm like, because Nate is like my comedy duo partner, right? Comedians have duo. Like, we go back and forth on each other, right? You're my Watson, I'm Sherlock Holmes, like, we're a team. I'm like, it's all fun. It's all fun and games. He knows I don't mean it. I only mean half of the things. See, that's an example of that. But anyway, for the sake of this argument, this is Father Nate, okay, this particular priest. But we were talking about this, and it was not an issue with this priest. He didn't say anything that was necessarily wrong, if you will. It was just his approach was very much of this whole, I had talked to him about growth in the church. This was a couple of years ago, and how Orthodoxy has this very much of this in this country. Sometimes has fallen into this trap of, well, we're this church that ran away from other countries, formed itself in this country, and then wants to make sure we hold on to the church by just basically staying within our ethnic groups, right? This particular person is not. He's a convert. I'm cradle, right? He's not even somebody who's American in the true sense of it. But he basically said, diaspora orthodoxy is actually the thing that's going to save orthodoxy. And I said, no. I said, that's wrong. That's why I'm saying I don't want to name this particular person, because it's a difference of opinion here, and I'm not meant to throw anybody under the bus. But he said, look, we almost have to be like stuck in our own little groups, because it's our own little groups that have preserved the church for all these times when the church has fallen under this kind of stuff. And I said, no, we can't do that, because when we do that, the enemy comes at us even harder, because he knows if we fall into that trap, he'll go at us even more, right? And I use the example of saying, look, the enemy saw that and took over Constantinople, okay? And for 400 years, Christianity was under evil control in that sense, right? And we countered out about that, and the devil went for a different target by going after Russia, and 100 million Russians were killed as a result of that, right? In that sense. Like if we just sit back and think if we can preserve it, we're going to die. We have to actually go out there and really preach the gospel and be the gospel, because we can't just sit back. In other words, what he was saying was, if you build a big church, people will just walk in on their own. You don't have to do any kind of advertising. And I personally think, and I've said this, to a few others, I've said, look, I personally think that every single Orthodox church in this country should have a marketing budget, a real marketing budget. If there's one thing that Protestants get right that we don't, and there's not a lot of things, but they get this one thing really right, is you tell me one megachurch that doesn't have a marketing budget. Okay? And that sounds like a weird thing to say. Why should they have it? Because if you're not spending some of your money to go out there and preach the gospel, somebody else is. Right? That's what it comes down to, that thing I talk about Mormons, right? They spend a lot of money on their evangelism. But people don't realize how much they actually spend. You think it's cheap to, it's free to have their guys on bicycles all over the country and all over the world? No, they pay for that, right? The people in their communities pay for that. Their wards pay for that, so that those kids can go out there and preach, unfortunately, a false gospel, but go out there and do it, right? We don't do anything like that. Why don't we do anything like that? And it comes back down to this, to this issue at hand, is we need to do that. We need to do that. We can't keep ourselves huddled up thinking we're going to be okay. Back to that rich fool thing we talked about a couple weeks ago, right? We can't keep ourselves huddled up, right? We're in a time when, the bridegroom is coming and he's going through, and if you don't have your lamps, lit with the oil, they're going to come in, they're going to take us over, right? And we're going to have to just deal with the consequences, right? In other words, and I think, funny enough, Nate, you did a great job of saying this, right? We can't take our foot off the gas, right? That's essentially what I was hoping people would get from this parable. So you kind of spoiled it to begin with, but that's okay, right? Maybe you should be Father Nate. We can't do that. Right? We can't just huddle up and think, if we build a big church, people are just going to see it on the side of the freeway and they'll just come to our church. No, we have to do more than that, right? Like, if there's one thing I've learned and found out, it's kind of funny, right? Because, one of the reasons I got put on that list that was the other day that you all talked to me about, and I've talked about, there was a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons is because the email that got leaked, one of the reasons he got upset at me, I'm talking about Jay Dyer, right? Was because I said, if you go out there and you put that kind of stuff out on the internet, right, then others latch onto it. And because I mentioned his name, that's why he latched onto it, right? Because it's true, right? If I go on there, like, look, if Father Michael, for example, I'm just going to pick on him for a second, he's not here, but if I was to use Father Michael, for example, in this sense, and say, if Father Michael got on me during like my sermon, I slipped up and cursed during my sermon, because you know how he feels about me cussing in church, right? I don't do it very often, but I've said words that are what we consider, like, I don't say dang. If I say dang, he considers that a cuss word, okay? I don't think dang's a cuss word, but, I mean, now the recording knows that, But he'd get upset about that. And he said, hey, can you please do that out of respect? And I said, of course, because, you respect your elders, and if it upsets somebody, I will try to do the best I can to accommodate in that sense. But if I said that in a sermon, right, and he was to like make a comment during my sermon, he has done that before, right? And I've not taken offense to it, right? But, if I went on there and I said, okay, fine, Father Michael made a comment, I'm going to go on Facebook later on and tell everybody how he did that, right? People are going to see that. It's going to become a thing, right? really, what you should do is you talk to Father Michael about it. I say, hey, Father Michael, I don't appreciate that. And you know what? He'd probably go, yeah, I'm sorry. But next, he'll do his old man thing and be like, well, I don't care. You don't do it. Okay, Father Michael. But in the same sense of it, right? It's between him and I, And it's because when things like that are grieved out there, it creates a perception, right? In that sense. And people latch on to that. And people look at that as opportunities, right? Because we live in a culture, also on top of everything else, that likes rage bait and likes dead scrolling and likes to react to everything, right? And everything's the next viral story for like 24 hours and then we move on to something else, or 40 hours and move on to something else, right? How often do you see someone say, oh, such as, this, did you hear about this controversy? And then like 2 days later, like, did you hear about this controversy? And then we forgot about the other one, right? It happens all the time, right? That's the kind of thing we do because the internet is like that, And literally, that's an issue we've dealt with for like the last 5 years, I think COVID accelerated that because everyone was inside, so they had to have something to lash out on, right? And everything like that. But my initial point that I'm getting to with this, right, is that we're out there. Like, we have to react because that's the way we're shaped, right? And things like that. We are a predominantly online culture, right? And so if we're just sitting there building a big building and such like that and having our services, that's not going to bring new people in. We have to take it to the next level. We actually have to go out there. And either through the internet, and oddly enough, I'm almost telling you guys to go talk about orthodoxy on the internet, right? Within taste, within correctness. Like don't go on there and start arguing with random Hindus, Jesse. To pick on you this time, right? But show what your faith looks like that, because that's what the internet has caused us to do, right? We can't just be a diaspora church. We can't just exist in this little hub in Rincon, because I'm going to tell you right off the bat, no one's going to know who we are. Okay? People don't look up Rincon and go, orthodoxy lives in Rincon. Made this comment, I think, a few weeks ago, right? That joke I was just to tell people when I lived in Colorado was orthodoxy is America's best kept secret, and Calhoun was orthodoxy's, because Calhoun was in like the middle of nowhere, and it was a predominantly Orthodox town, right? Like an actual Orthodox town in the sense of 800 people. And yes, 130 or 140 or so of them, 150 or so were part of my parish in one way or another. Everybody was Orthodox in one way or another through marriage, right? You had Orthodox, Catholics, and Lutherans all together, essentially. Like, you would have every one of those in your family. And it was completely normal to have that. Completely normal out there, right? But everyone didn't sit there and go, yeah, that's a Lutheran town, or that's a Catholic town. That was an Orthodox town. Everyone, even though we weren't the majority, we were still a big enough minority, right? There were more Lutherans and Catholics in that town, but everyone said that was an Orthodox town because it was inbred in every aspect of that town, right? And everything like that. But my point is like, that could work for that. If that works for your area, that works for your area. It doesn't work throughout the rest of the country, right? We have to go out there and do more. We have to be out there. We have our candles with the oil. You know what? The bridegroom is here. And we have to say to ourselves, are we ready? Are we actually doing what we're supposed to do? Right? I'll let it on this and I'll let people jump in, right? At the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus tells the disciples, go out and preach to all nations. He doesn't just say, go out and preach to all nations, and when you get to a certain number of people, stop. He doesn't say that. He says, go out and preach to all nations. And that's where it ends. That's where the gospel ends. Go out and preach to all nations. The end. Right? There is no, go out and preach to all nations and, oh yeah, you got the whole empire Christian. Cool. You're good. Oh yeah, you got America, all Orthodox. Good. You're good. No, you can stop. All people. Always. To the end of time. Till Jesus comes back. To the second coming. That's what this gospel and this parable is really about too. As you do it till the end of time, till the end of your days. Fool, your soul is required of you. The bridegroom is walking through right now. And we're at a time where if your oil is not prepared and your foot's not on the gas, you're going to be left behind. And we can't let the church be left behind, especially with today, with how many people are hungry for truth and hungry for the church, hungry for this. right? You all came here because you were hungry for more, right? Every person here, with the exception of myself, is a convert in some way or another, right? Some who have already converted, some who are catechumens, okay? You were all hungry for something, right? That's not enough, because we have to do more. We have to do it. It's why I won't shut up about evangelism. I will never shut up about it, right? It's because we have to do more. Because the world out there is going to replace us. It will be happy to replace us, because it doesn't want us out there, because we tell them they're wrong. We don't just tell them they're wrong. Orthodoxy doesn't just say you're wrong, but it says you're doubly extra wrong. And not only are you doubly extra wrong, it's because the world says this is your God. You don't want to go to church? That's okay. You want to sleep in on Sundays? That's okay. You want to make yourself happy? Hedonism, in this sense, that's good for you. Whatever makes you happy. You know, if you want to call yourself, Natalie instead of Nate, and start wearing a dress and calling yourself a woman, sorry again, picking on you, good for you. You do whatever makes you happy. Jason, you're next. Don't even think about it. If Jason wants to start identifying as Logan from Wolverine, and I'll give you a nicer one, okay? Then you identify. You start telling us you're Logan, and we have to abide by that. And if you want to tell me you're a Wolverine, a superhero mutant, I mean, good for you. I just accept it's true. And that's what the culture wants us to accept. And we tell it no. And anything, when I talked about it a while back, I said orthodoxy in a nutshell is objectivism. I'm sorry, not objectivism. Sorry. The objective reality telling the subjective reality no. That that relativism cannot, and will not ever work. And we are counter to that. We are counter to relativism. And if we don't continue to counter to relativism will win. Because relativism has it easy, right? In the sense of it, sorry, I'm going to bring a sports analogy into this, but there's a requirement to do at least 5 of these in class, okay? And I think I'm only at 2. I don't know how many I've done yet, but I'm at least at 1, okay? Right? I talked about this a few weeks ago, right? We were Effingham County High School playing against Alabama, right? Alabama can walk in, they don't have to practice. If you put up, or better yet, because last time we were watching the Golden Knights game, my daughter said, what would happen if her team played against Vegas? And I'm like, you get slaughtered. You would get slaughtered, right? They're like, a team of 10U girls is going to get their butts kicked, right? I mean, it's obvious, right? Because they don't even have to practice. My daughter's team would have to practice for years to even go 5 minutes against them, and they would still get beat, right? That's relativism right now. Relativism doesn't need anything. It can just literally just be what it is. And we have to come back at it with truth. We have to put the effort into it, right? And that leads to kind of an interesting sort of discussion in this sense of how do we do that, right? How do we define our faith? And I'll end on this, and then maybe this will be a good way of leading the discussion in this sense of saying, how do we have a proper elevator pitch too, right? When somebody asks you the question of what is orthodoxy, and things like that, how many of us can give a 2-sentence answer to that? It's hard. It's really hard to do that. It can be done, right? And maybe that's what, if anyone has an answer, I'd be curious to hear it in a second. The world just has to say, you do you, that's it. 3 words, you do you, whatever you want, right? We have to give basically what feels like dissertations to defend our faith, So they have a much easier battle against us, right? They're the Golden Knights, and we're the Savannah Sirens girls team. Well, there is no Savannah Sirens boys team, but we're the Savannah Sirens, okay? But the funny thing is, we're actually the real hockey team, and they're not the hockey team. That sounds weird to say that, okay? They don't have to fight. They don't have to put any effort in. They can take people away from us, which means we really have to be on the ready. We really have to be prepared. We can't just sit back and go, it's a harder battle for us, but you want to know something? We're the better for it. They're not. Because we give them something they can't have. And I'm not going into my hockey analogy here because it doesn't work in this case, right? Because we have something they don't have. We have truth. We have objective reality. We have Christ. As I said a while back, right? Father Anthony Carbo, blessed memory, used to say this, right? Your friends might know who Jesus is, they might believe who Jesus is, but we have Jesus. We have him. So we have the truth on our side, right? Now how do we respond back to that? So anyway, some people had some comments. I'm going to go to the back first. David, you had something you wanted to say.
Your elevator pitch.
You got to speak louder because you're further in the back.
Your elevator pitch, I heard there was a priest in McKinney, Texas, who said the elevator pitch is...
Is that Father John Whiteford? I think it's Father John Whiteford.
No, Father Seraphim.
Okay.
Said,
He was in
He
Texas.
said the elevator pitch is the Good Samaritan.
Mm-hmm.
The way that God treats us is the way the Good Samaritan treated the man on the road. I mean, that would be what orthodoxy is.
I think that's correct in some sense. But I actually think we do have an elevator pitch. It's not that. Not a real one. A better elevator pitch. They have 3 words. We should have 3 words too. Anybody know what those 3 words are? Nate.
I would say,
God bless you is a good one. God bless you is good 3 words.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy is another good 3 words, but that's not the 3 words I'm thinking.
what I like to think about is the humble truth.
The humble truth. That's 3 words. That's not the 3 words I'm thinking of. Anybody else? Lily, you've been quiet. I'm going to pick on you. You don't know? It's okay.
3 words.
I don't know those are 3 words. What is Orthodox? I don't know. Why are you Orthodox? I don't know. What does your church believe? I don't know. I mean, that's a good one. I'm not picking on you, but I mean, that's actually kind of a funny one, because can you imagine doing that and somebody go on? Never mind. Anyway, Liam.
Death to the world.
That's 4 words. What's that? The true faith. That's 3 words too, but that's not the 3 words for an elevator pitch. All right. Luke, it's your last week. You have to talk.
Christ is present.
That's a good 3 words, but that's not a good elevator pitch. That's not the words I'm thinking of.
I was going to say deny yourself, but that doesn't work.
Deny yourself. That's 2 words.
Yeah.
You got another one, Nate?
No, I'm
Okay.
I'm out.
It's not that complicated, but it seems like it's complicated. 3 words that could be the perfect elevator pitch for bringing people to church and telling them this is a counter to that.
Come and see.
Come and see. That's the 3 words right there. That's the elevator pitch. I find that when we had that thing on Saturday night with that waitress and everything like that. I gave her one of my cards. We'll see if she shows up, but hey, if she doesn't, that's on her. But we did the thing, right? She asked some questions. She goes, are you guys like the Greek Orthodox Church downtown in Savannah? I said, kind of. We are the same church, but different jurisdictions. Then I'm getting into a dissertation conversation with her instead of having an academic conversation with her instead of having the conversation of what I'm trying to do. What am I trying to accomplish? Which finally I just said, well, we're just down the street. Why don't you come and visit us sometime? Come to liturgy one Sunday. Come to church, right? That's our elevator pitch. I think that the thing is we today try too hard to try to explain what orthodoxy is to people. And it isn't to make it all secretive and all that kind of stuff. They really want to have that conversation. We should have that conversation. You know, one of the funniest thing, because it's funny, and again, it sounds like I'm sort of harping on this, like as though I'm like anti-ortho bro and everything like that, based on what the internet thinks about me now. Okay, I mean, you guys aren't the only ones that called me and talked to me about that thing. You know, the funny thing about it is like in some sense of it, they're doing an elevator. The ortho bros are doing an elevator pitch. They don't even realize that they should be digging into more, just doing it better. Which is, what is the one thing that you always see them say? A lot of them say online. 2 words this time. And I see somebody post something. There's one account. Oh, I think it's like, is it Christian Mario or something? He's going to put me on the list next too. But Ben Luigi, that's the one. Yeah, he has said a lot of times because I see on there, what is the 2 words he says in a ton of posts? Anybody? If any of you tell them I've mentioned them, I want to see if they put me on a list now. That one was challenging it. It's not as hard as this come and see one. It's 2 words. I'll tell you, I'll save you guys the trouble. I won't get 12 different answers. Become Orthodox. Become Orthodox. It's another elevator pitch, right? That's another really good elevator pitch because it just says become Orthodox. Now, how do we make them become Orthodox? As I always say, like instead of arguing with people online, right, you oftentimes see them just for choo-choo, become Orthodox. Now, I think what ends up happening with that is they just will post that in every single comment whenever someone says, oh, I don't like what the Pope did, become Orthodox. Right? Or I don't like what that particular, like when I saw with the Anglicans, they had made that the woman the leader of the church, the woman bishop. I put bishop in quotes, right? You would see a lot of comments of saying, oh, you guys should just become Orthodox already, or a lot of, and I made that joke of saying, good, I hope they do more of that stuff because then they'll be interested in us, right? They'll run away to us. But not if we don't latch onto it, not if we don't attack it. I don't mean attack physically, but I mean like if we don't, see the opportunity and take advantage of it, then we're going to be, it's our fault when they go become Mormons or other things, right? Become Orthodox. That's another one, right? It's almost an easier one, but that doesn't quite explain that the church is. What really explains the church is telling them to come and see. Anthony does a great job of this in his class. He does it much better than I do in this class. I felt like, and I had someone say to me the other day, sometimes, Father, your class sort of sounds like you're venting about your own personal issues. And I was like, I think kind of. But I mean, really, it's because I want to see this church grow. And I want to see everybody in the world become Orthodox. And I want to see this, I don't want to see us be taken over by other things. I've seen what it does to people. And there's something powerful in this place. Right? Because this is where Christ is. We have Christ. And I want to see everyone experience that. And some people will struggle to experience that at first, but at least I can get them here. Father Eric Tossi was my priest when I was a kid. He used to say, get them into the church and then fix them afterwards. Right? That literally is his entire dissertation on his evangelism thesis. Was get them into church and then fix them. Right? Because you can't fix them if they're out there in the world doing other things. And so maybe it is a little bit of venting because I see so many people out there suffering and hurting, right? And that's why I say Anthony does this a little bit better because Anthony talks heavily about this idea of healing and bringing people into healing. And he had a line that he said to me, this was actually something when you guys all know Josh, right? He's not here tonight, but when he and I first started talking, and I like bringing this up, and I've talked to him, I've asked him if I can talk about this. He said, no problem. I said to him when he first was interested, I said, because he was coming at religion from a completely secular perspective of not understanding why he needs it in any capacity. And I said to him, from Anthony's own words, although I kind of lied to Josh and told him some church father said this because I didn't want to, I asked Anthony, we'll keep you anonymous on this, and then I'm semi-lying, sort of saying a church father said this, but really in a sense, because there are church fathers who say this, and things. So Anthony was just echoing that. But it said to him, open your heart and let God touch it. Right? That's where healing starts and begins. If you're willing to open your heart and let God touch it, then you can be healed. Right? And like I said, Anthony does a better job of explaining that than I do. But that's the whole thing, right? Come and see so that you can be healed. That's the fullness of that statement. But you can't get them to be healed if they don't come and see first. So when someone says, what is orthodoxy? Yeah, you can have that conversation. And I said, you don't have debates online because that doesn't do you any good, right? Debates, that probably got me on the list too. Because I've said to people, don't get into debates online because you're not going to do any good, right? Maybe it gets a few people in, but it's not an effective tactic. Because people see that stuff and they go, if they're just fighting, then why should I be part of that? What you were saying to me earlier, David, right? Like, your godfather, or potential godfather, said to, you're never going to, if you're looking for the perfect church, you're not really going to find it when it comes to the people, right? Well, that's what people see online. They'll see us in a certain way. And it's brand perception is really what we're talking about here, okay? That's why I say come and see, come and see. That's the purpose of this parable, is be ready to say come and see to people. Because if you're not, your oil really, to summarize it in this sense, the oil in your lamp is come and see. Come and see, because the bridegroom is right here, right now, walking through. The bridegroom's here. Come and see. Do you want to see this? Do you want to have truth? Do you want to be saved? You know? We want to live in this world of like, okay, great, you know what? Like, okay, I think this is sports reference number 5 or 4. We'll go with 4 so I can have one more. Okay? Right? Do you want to live in the legacy of the past? With a lot of teams, we'll talk about their legacy of the things, right? But that legacy goes away, right? I mean, generations come and go. Do you think anybody ever thinks about a Roman gladiator from, yes, there are famous Roman gladiators that are talked about in history, right? But that was sport back then, right? Do you think that those people, that matters to anybody anymore? No, that comes and goes and dies away, right? But I think I say like, I think it takes 100 years for someone to be fully forgotten in history, something like that. And 200 years, 100 years for a famous person to be 100 years for someone who's not famous to be forgotten, and then 200 years for a famous person to be forgotten. And then like a really famous person, it takes a few more centuries than that. But eventually, most people eventually get forgotten in some way or another. Unless you have a historical record of some of those people, is a perfect example of this, right? How many people can name every single president of the United States? It's a good example there. How many people can name every single king and queen of England that have ever existed? Or every single king and queen of any country? Or every Roman emperor? You could name a few of them. How many people can name every single saint in the church? Well, of saints we know of. Some of those just get forgotten over history, right? We have to go through the written record to find those people. But a lot of them get forgotten throughout history, like legacy, But not to be on this tangent for too long to say this in the sense of here, the beautiful thing about all this is that even if you're forgotten to the world, you're never forgotten to God. And that's what his message is, saying, come and see. Because in the kingdom of heaven, everybody's on equal playing foot, and everybody's focused on God. And everybody gets to experience the goodness and the love of God. And it doesn't matter what your legacy is, because your only thing that matters is, are you with God? Are you in communion with God? Are you did you get saved by Christ in that way? Did you come and see and experience him? And actually turn away from the fallenness and the brokenness of the world and be with God, which isn't broken, which isn't fallen, which is eternal. That's why our elevator pitch has to be come and see. Comments, questions, concerns, critiques. I got a comment box now. I still don't. I need a comment box just to say that joke. It'll be real.
I exaggerated the look on purpose. So a little thing that I want to, that I know I brought up in the past, but I'm going to bring up again in perpetuity ad nauseum, is one of the things that I did on shore duty in the Navy is I was a recruiter. And from a secular point of view, there's two things that further reinforces that we can't just keep orthodoxy as a secret. Because what happens when you're not growing as an organization? You're shrinking. Because some people are just going to leave. It is what it is. It happens. I know as a recruiter, and unfortunately, we're dealing with that as a church. People die, people fall off the wagon, so on and so forth. So if you're not constantly out there fishing for people, so to speak, you're not going to be able to replace the losses that you have. Goodness gracious, I had another thing that I wanted to say. And in terms of evangelism, there's many different avenues that you could take. One thing that I'd like to point out for people is if you're not a people person that can just go feed on somebody's door and tell them to come to church, CDS, you can make you can get 50 flyers for $15.
Did you pick those up?
I didn't pick them up. They're still there. If somebody wants to go to Richmond Hill and pick up 50 flyers, I'll give you $20. Yes.
Careful when you do that with Walgreens, though. They mess up your business cards. You have to get them remade. Teasing. You should see the version of the business cards that I had that were made. Half of the cut was off.
Oh,
like
yeah.
The QR. It's one thing if they make a mistake. They cut off my QR code. That won't work anymore. Anyway. But hold on, let's jump in. So that's an interesting thing right there. So we didn't talk about that too much. But because I wanted to sort of say in this sense of it, right? So some of you Well, this will be an interesting experiment. Raise your hand if you're an introvert. Raise your hand if you're an extrovert. Jason, you need to raise your hand for either one of those.
I'm in between.
You think you're in between?
Yeah.
Okay. David, I didn't think I see you. Did you raise your hand for which one?
I don't believe in that.
Okay. Well, for sake of argument, because it really doesn't matter whether or not one is an introvert or extrovert. I think people play on both sides depending on the circumstance. That's why I don't really define it in that way and all of this stuff. So I'm probably closer to it on the issue than with you, David, on that. Although I don't know where you 100% line up on that. It's not important right now, you know. And the reason I wanted to do this experiment was a sense of most people see that as, or raise their hand for one way or the other because it's not necessarily they're introverted or extroverted. One second, Liam. They're introverted or extroverted. It usually has to do with how do they engage with people, right? And some people are really good at engaging with people. Like Nate's great at engaging with people, really good at engaging with people, you know? And others, not so much, or others just don't know how to, right? And, or better yet, others are just not in that sense of like they, you know, I will go up to you and be like, hey, Lily, it's nice to see you. How are you? Right? You might do that to me now because you know me, right? You know, but if in public and somebody you've never met me before, you're probably not going to talk to me. You're probably going to ignore me completely. You're probably going to wonder why there's a guy in a black dress walking by. You know, but then again, it's Savannah, so I could be a student at SCAD. Okay. See, if I was in the pro skills group, I would have made that joke. Okay? Anyway, you probably wouldn't, other than I guess I made that joke about SCAD, but that's neither here or there. Okay? Because this is not your personality, right? So how do you engage with people to bring them into church, right? And that's the second thing we didn't really talk about, right? Though we have talked about it before, you know, is being an image of Christ around the people you are around, right? How many of you do people look at and go, that's a pretty godly person, right? We oftentimes, I've talked about this before, you know, how one of my sort of pet peeves, although at the same time I kind of like it, it's weird, in the sense of like, you know, one of my pet peeves, I call it moral agnosticism, but really what I jokingly call it is the Tim Taylor Christianity, right? You know, the show Tool Time from Home Improvement, that Home Improvement show, but the Tool Time guy, Tim Allen's character on the show, right? It's sort of this like he lives a very like morally agnostic lifestyle where his faith is just kind of like, oh, you know, he's white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. He cares more about like making sure that his kids have enough to eat, that his wife is happy, that he gets a little joy out of his marriage, and he just lives, does his work, and then dies one day, and he lived a good life, right? And everything's all good. You know, that's the vast majority of people in our society that live that way, right? They don't want to cause any problems. They just want to live their lives, have a decent life, have everything that they need throughout their lives so that they're happy, retire one day, and then just die. And live a good life, right? We talk about wanting to live having a good death, right? What does a good death look like? Something that Deacon and I talked about with his mother. She had a good death because she was 92 years old. She got to see her grandkids. You know, she was married to her husband for like 60 years, I believe. He can correct me on that later. You know, she got to experience a lot of joy in her life. Obviously some sadness and sorrow, but she had a good life. You know, and in a sense of it, she had a good death because she lived into her old age. She got to die at home around her family. We all dream of that, right? Nobody wants to be walking down the street and get hit by a bus, you know, or anything like that. Nobody just wants to suddenly die. They want to die on their terms. In the sense of it, she did die on her terms. You know, but that's most people, right? We want that. So how do we react to that too, right? How is many of us who live that way, and I'm not accusing any of you being like that, you know, but, you know, how do we, on the flip side of it, like one could be a good recruiter and go out there and put out a bunch of flyers and hand people stuff like that. How do we look like that in our lives, right? How many people around us see us, you know, as, oh, that's a good Orthodox Christian. One second, David. how do people see us like that? How do people, like in our families, and stuff like that? Actually, I'm going to pick on Liam now for a second. I'm not picking on anybody. I never pick on anybody except for Luke, since it's his last class. Okay, I don't pick on anybody, But Liam, you bought your dad an icon of David, right? Of King David, and I bless it on Sunday, That's you living your faith and him seeing that, right? Now, did you sit there and have an argument with him or say, you better become Orthodox or come and see, or here's the other? You just said, Dad, here's an icon. Here's something I can give you that shows you a bit of Christ, right? I tell the kids this all the time. Tell me how many Jesuses are in church, right? And it's everywhere because that icon represents that, sure, right? You gave your dad a little bit of Jesus. And maybe it spurs a conversation. Maybe it gets him to come to church one time, right? But it starts something there. And you didn't have to sit there and have this, let's have a big old session, an academic, back and forth on the matter. You're not somebody I would... Did you raise your hand for the introvert or the extrovert? I can't remember.
Oh, so for me, I don't really believe that someone can be introvert or extrovert. I think they kind of mirror who they're surrounded by.
That's kind of where I'm at with it. I think it depends on your situation, right? There will be moments when I'm like, you would look at me and go, there's no way Father Stephen's an introvert. I don't think of myself as an introvert or an extrovert.
Like I can be in a crowd full of people I don't know, and I'm going to be, introverted because I don't know anybody in that crowd. But if I'm in a crowd full of people I know, like people here, I'm going to be extroverted.
Right. So, yeah, I'm in the same boat. Sometimes I'll feel like I'm in a different... It depends on the scenario where you're at, right? Of course. But most people feel like, even if they know people, that they're not. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So your own family, you feel comfortable around them. You could talk to them about that, right? One of the things since I picked on Josh earlier and he wasn't here, but I'm going to use him as an example in this sense, right? Josh, when he first started coming here, came to me and said, Father, I have this weird idea. I've been praying and reading about this stuff with monastics and how they have prayer ropes. And Josh made a bunch of prayer ropes. He's like, I can't engage with these people because I don't know anything about the church. But these people that I encounter in my job and stuff like that, I just start giving them prayer ropes and say, hey, this is just a prayer rope, right? Like, that's what I'm talking about. There's other ways of doing it. Yes, handing out flyers is great. Having conversations with them is great, right? But some of us can't do that. Some of us also can't just hand out prayer ropes and icons, right? The flip side of bringing people in is being an image of Christ to them, too, right? Like, how many people here would sit there and say, if they had a flat tire, right, they would come and change that person's tire? How many people here? Every person here should raise their hand, even if you don't know how to change it, a tire, right? Because you should already at the ready be somebody who can say, you need help, I'm there for you, right? I talked a lot about this with Mormons. I said the one thing about Mormons that they do better than us is they're very service-oriented, okay? And I'm almost saying like we have to tailor our way of doing things a lot like them, because you know what? Copying what others do sometimes is actually a good thing. Even if they're wrong and everything else, sometimes they get things right, okay? And they're very service-oriented. I talked about this with my wife's aunt when she was dying, right? I think I've told this story before. But, they showed up, a couple of elders showed up at her husband, or their family's door, but her husband answered the door and said, whatever you need, go down the street to our pantry and we'll take care of it, and stuff like that. Like, they offered service but they weren't even asked. They just did it, right? So the thing is that was an image of Christ, although the wrong image in one sense because their beliefs are wrong, but in a certain sense of it, it's just like Jesus said. What does he say in the scriptures? If they're not actively against me, they're with me, right? He's not saying, yes, they can live how they want to live, and yes, they can do what they want to do, right? He's still calling them wrong in the sense of it, right? But if they're doing things that are good, we shouldn't be upset at the things that they're doing. And sometimes you might even learn something from them, right? And it's sort of also a play on the whole give unto Caesar thing that he also says, right? Where he's saying, look, if they're doing things right and good, they should be. We shouldn't take those things and completely diminish it, right? We take things in the church. We don't, in other words, again, I'm going to quote Father Eric on this one, but Father Eric also used to say to me all the time, right, that the culture the culture doesn't how did he phrase it? It was, the culture doesn't Christianize. We Christianize the culture, I think is how he says it. Right? We go out there. How we live is just as important as the come and see speech. Right? How we are out there in the world. That's the second thing. For those who can go out there and recruit, great. We should have that. We've got to have people who can do that. But it also has to be people as well within ourselves. We have to be that image too. Right? You know? You have to ask yourself on a daily basis, am I being an image of Christ? Because that's what people need to see. Right? Because they're not going to, if you have a conversation with them, like Lily, you come from a Baptist background, right? You know, if your family sees you and says, okay, Lily's gone off and become a catechumen in this other church, or like that, I'm assuming you're going to see the family for Christmas, right? You know, are they going to see the change in you as, oh, this person's taking on an Orthodox ethos? It's another thing that Anthony does better explaining, is saying taking on an ethos, right? That spirit of truth, right? Are they going to see that? I'm not picking on you, but I'm kind of in a sense, right? Or are they just going to see it's like, oh, she went and joined some weird little cult thing, right? Like, because maybe you do you have any siblings?
Not that live with me.
Not, okay, but are they going to be there for Christmas?
Probably.
All right. Do you have a brother or sister?
Right.
Okay, you get along with your brother?
Somewhat.
Somewhat. Okay, so you get an argument with your brother, for example, over something stupid, because siblings fight over stupid things, right? Are they going to see that as, oh, you know what, Lily's the forgiving one, or Lily's the one that holds on to grudges? I don't think you're that person that holds on to grudges, but let's just say hypothetically, right? Like, are you living as an image of Christ to your family? Are they seeing it going, oh, wow, since she became an Orthodox catechumen, she's a lot more nicer to her brother. I'm not saying you guys fight, but let's put it 10 for hypothetical reasons. You guys used to cat fight and all that type of stuff, and now you come in there and you ask forgiveness. That's something completely different than anything they've probably ever experienced before. Now, my point being, and again, sorry I'm picking on you a little bit, right, using you as the example, you know, that's an example in which we can do that to the people that we can't sit there and recruit in that sense. Go ahead, David.
Right now, there are a ton of people that are coming to Orthodoxy all around the nation. Are you saying that the reason why people are coming to God and to Orthodoxy is because Orthodox Christians are being so kind in their communities to draw all these people to the religion? And from what I read in the Bible, Jesus makes it very clear that no one can come to him unless the Father draws them to him. It seems to me like some huge change in the nation like this has more to do with God and what he's doing than it does with whether or not we're smiling when we check out people's groceries or being kind to our neighbor.
The draw, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, the thing that's doing it, yes, it's obviously God guiding them. That would slightly adjust what you said. It's the Holy Spirit bringing them, the third person of the Trinity that's bringing them to the church, right? Kind of placing them in that sense of it, because you can only come through the Father is talking about the kingdom of heaven. That's a little more on that sense. So you're half right in that way, but it does factor into the fact that one of the reasons why Orthodoxy is growing in this country has to do, not because people are nicer at the grocery line, right? In fact, I don't think people are nicer at the grocery line, right? It's that they are being charitable, right? The parishes that are growing the most, and when I say growing, I'm not talking about, oh yeah, they get a bunch of visitors every Sunday, that are actually keeping those people in the church, right, for long periods of time, right? And hold on a second, Jason. And keeping those people in the church are those parishes that live the faith, right? Are not just parishes that say, okay, they're here now. They're because they're reacting to the world and they don't like what's going on in the world. Okay, it's the communities themselves that are keeping those people here, because those communities are trying to live the faith. They're trying to show it. There are a lot of parishes in this country that are growing, but they're not growing in keeping those people. The people are coming and going. One of the biggest complaints when I was growing up, in the parish I grew up in Las Vegas, okay, was you had a person there for 2 years and they were gone. It was because of work mostly. right? And now people are staying there, and people are staying in those parishes, especially that parish, like St. Paul's in Las Vegas, are staying in that because the community itself is warm and welcoming and actually putting in programs that bring people in and say, hey, you know what, you're not just brought in, but like we're doing more than that, right? Like that parish has a homeless feeding ministry. Other parishes have homeless feeding ministries. Those are things I've talked about that we have to have more of. That's why I talk about give me ideas for ministries, and we'll do them, right? It's programs, of course, which sound like kind of very Protestant-y in that sense of have programs that keeps people in. But you want to know something, though? Like, it's the community. It definitely factors in to keeping those people in. The programs are one of those things, but it's the community itself. Seeing people being warm and welcoming. If a person in this parish, here, David, you haven't heard this story before, but I'm going to tell this story again, right? Father Thomas Hopko, of blessed memory, liked to tell this story about a lady, a Filipino woman that came into church one time, and came into a church that he was visiting and heard this story about. It was a very Russian parish, and at coffee hour, one of the Russian ladies walked up to that Filipino woman and said, "Your church is down the street." And that lady never walked back into an Orthodox church. That was a situation in which the community failed a person who came into the church. And that parish died as a result of that, because their mindset wasn't on the mindset of everyone's welcome. It's why I always tell everybody I've got one rule, which is two rules. You can't root for the Sharks and Oilers and the Packers too, I guess, right? And everyone's welcome. That's my real one rule. Everyone's welcome. It's not because I'm like, oh, you know what? Come as you are and be whatever you want to be. That's not what that means. That means people have to know that they're welcome to come here, because this is a hospital that heals people, that brings people to Christ and brings them into the kingdom of God and brings them salvation. That's why orthodoxies in parishes that are growing, that are really growing, right, and have kept that growth going and have kept those people in there, that's why they keep those people in there, because those communities are people trying to be examples of what the faith is. The communities that don't do that, yes, they may be growing, because churches are growing everywhere, and Orthodox churches. People are getting people all the time, right? They're not keeping them, though. And the reason that the ones that are not keeping them, it's because their communities are not strong. They're not together. They don't, and that's one of the reasons I think I said this on Sunday. Like, it should not just be my job. I texted the greeters chat too. I said, I'm going to probably start relying on you guys in the chat, in this greeters chat, to reach out to some of these new people, because I can't reach out to all of them and make them feel welcome and wanting to come back.
I was greeted in the middle of the service by the guy, and he wanted me to fill out a paper, visitor form, while they're singing and stuff going on. And I'm like, it was actually really distracting as a visitor.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're the first person who said that to me.
Yeah.
Right? So that's an example there, right? So we talk a lot about how do we keep them in the church, right? How do people feel welcome and stuff like that. This is reference number 7, okay? But like a good coach, we make adjustments, right? So the answer to that question is, well, what do you do about that, right? Not everybody can, orthodoxy, I tell you, here's the solution to it. You got to have a good, warm, welcoming community, right? But what does that look like too, right? And so somebody says, hey, Father, when I came into the church, yes, the parish was welcoming, but they bombarded me, And I will say this right off the bat, and now I'm going to actually pick on Luke, okay? For real, pick on Luke. All right? The first time Luke walked into the church, we had a very awkward exchange. It wasn't his fault. It was my fault. I came over hey, all goofy, because my mind was on something else, and I did something. I was kind of goofy, right? And this is where I would say, in the sense of it, right? I don't think it really went that well, kind of stuff, because I basically, I fudged it up, if you will. I messed up my encounter with the first impression, right? Now, I would equate him coming back to 2 things, right? One, God. Ultimately, God brought him back, okay? Because God can fix all of those problems in that sense, because he can see, hey, you know what? I'm flawed just as much as everybody, too, right? But the second thing that kind of brought him back, and you can confirm or deny this, just confirm it for the sake of argument, I'm kidding, was, I think, genuinely Luke saw that I was actually trying to reach out to him.
Yeah, I did see that.
And that I actually wanted him here, you know? And I say that in the sense of a good community. Thank you, Luke. You had to agree with that regardless, okay? But I think because I made the attempt where others would not have made that attempt, or I would have just blown it off, that's one of the reasons he came back. So an adjustment would be, well, have a better conversation with people. Don't be less awkward to people, right? Try to work, make that little adjustment like a good coach would make, you know? Leave up to God to help with that, right? Let the Holy Spirit guide in that sense. But people see generally want something for you, they tend to draw to that, right? I generally want every person in this parish to be here. And that's not me being having pride. I look at everyone's struggles and go, gosh, that sucks, but you know what? I'm glad you're here, so at least we can do something about that. You know, there's another priest I'm going to quote here. I quote a lot of priests, but there's another priest I want to quote here that had an article written about him a number of years ago. Father Paul Aberchild, I think his last name was, right? Where it was during all the Black Lives Matter stuff that was going on. And somebody had asked him and said, you know, what do you do when somebody comes to your church, right? That's a racist or white supremacist, you know? And he goes, thank God, because now they can be healed, right? This is back to the Father Eric thing, right? You know, he generally wants them in the church. So if somebody comes into the church and things like that and is completely flawed, and I completely mess up that conversation with them, right? You know, I hope that they will see I generally want them here, because I do actually want them here. You know, like you and I were talking about this before the class, right? You got a lot of internal things to work out and struggle through. But I said to you at the very end, I hope you please come back, right? I really mean that, you know? And the churches that are growing are people that are living like that, okay? Like you can walk into an Orthodox church and go, this church is weird. There's a whole bunch of things going on, right? But if the people generally are happy that people are here, right? You know, even if they're doing everything wrong, you know, even if they're doing everything wrong in the sense of it, oh, the choir is off and this, things like that. And they generally want people there, they're going to be drawn to it. Remember I said earlier how Cowhand was basically an Orthodox town, right? In this sense, even though, yes, everybody was Orthodox through marriage in one way or another. They related to somebody who was Orthodox. That's part of it, right? But I'm going to tell you, think about that town and why I say that town's an Orthodox town. Even though it's a town of 800 people, okay? It's because the Orthodox in that town that actually were members of that parish generally were happy that the people that would show up to, say, Slavic Fest were there. They were actually happy they were there. Not because they wanted their money for the event, right? And stuff like that. Because I'm going to tell you that one parish did not have money issues whatsoever. Okay? And owned all their land, no debt, not a single bit. Had money, you know, in a building fund they never have to touch. Okay? Even so much so that OSIF, which is a Orthodox charity or a nonprofit that's involved with helping parishes, you know, fund their parishes, their buildings, and like mortgages type of thing, right? Gave money to them to do that, right? That aspect of it. But it was really more that this particular parish had this idea that, and I was just joking and say, if the church burned down, they would build it back in 3 days, kind of a thing. Which is ironic because that church had burned down 4 times for other various reasons, not because of people, you know, weather and such like that. But those people generally were happy that people were there and welcoming of people. And they embodied that ethos. Even though they're not growing like this parish is growing, they held on to that same ethos. And when people came into the church, yes, some of them came in and never walked back into the church again, right? And you do that. You know that coming in, right? But every person there, for the most part, I would say like 90% of it, because obviously it's never going to be 100%. Because again, we're all sinners, so nobody's going to be perfect at this. Okay? But they generally were happy when people showed up for the first time and came and saw what this is all about. And that's the thing about it. The thing about that, about parishes that survive and grow and actually really grow, are ones that, you know what, they're generally happy people are here. Right? They're not just like, I talk a lot about numbers, and I'll let's comment on this. I talk a lot about numbers. The numbers are just a figure, something to strive for, a goal of some kind. The numbers don't mean anything. If I spend the next 20 years of my life trying to grow this parish to 500 people, and I only get to 200 people in 20 years, but that's 200 people who generally love Christ over everything else and want to work on their own salvation, and they know that, and then people here make them feel that way, and the people around them make each other feel that way, then that's a life, that's a good life. That means I did something right, you know? That's what it boils down to. And as I say, I'm telling you right back, because you've been kind of overseas and seeing a lot of different things in the church, right? I can tell you from my experience and from what I know, the communities that survive because the community internally is strong. And they don't say your church is down the street, Filipino lady. Even if they're a predominantly Russian church, they're ecstatic that a Filipino woman shows up in their church, right? If a person, I had an inquirer who was emailing me for a while and then never showed up, sadly enough. You know, I think they were scared to come, right? Who was a trans person. And I said, I hope you come to church. I generally want you to come to church. And they're worried because people are going to look at them and go, that's a dude. Well, yeah, that is a dude, okay? But you want to know something? They're going to look at them and go, glory to God, right? You know, it's no secret that I was not a big fan of the last president, president of the United States, okay? But he walked into this church right now and said to me, you know, if he could, you know, I'm not making a dementia joke here. I'm just saying if he could actually physically walk into this church, despite everything that I disagree with him on, and he came in here and said, I want to be an Orthodox Christian before I die, I would say glory to God and be ecstatic to baptize him or chrismate him, okay? It doesn't matter who that is. And that should be the mindset. And that's what I tell people they have to have. You know, that's why in my bulletin I say to people specifically, you know, have you brought someone into church? Do they feel like they're welcome? It's why the bulletin says on there, Lord, it's good to be here. You know, I told you earlier to read Father Alexander Schmeman's For the Life of the World. You should also, this one's shorter, every single person here should reread through his Thanksgiving sermon, right? Because the whole entire, it was the last sermon he ever preached, the famous Thanksgiving sermon that gets sent out every year on Thanksgiving, right? Where he says, Lord, it is good to be here, right? It is good to be here. People, you know, thank you, God, for giving. And that's the mindset that I want this parish to have. I want every parish to have that mindset. I think generally the priests I know who have growing parishes, that's the mindset in their communities, is that they're happy people are here. The churches that don't have that are not growing. Anyway, did that someone answer your question or kind of comment? Okay, anything else? No? No comments? Yeah, I feel like you want to say something. Or Jason, Jesse, you had something, but Jason, you had your hand raised. But Jesse, go first.
Mine's not relevant to the recording, so.
Okay, then we'll wait. Jason, you had your hand raised earlier.
No, it's good.
Are you sure?
That's what I want to say. It's all good.
You're long past what you wanted to say?
Yeah,
We'll say it.
Well, I want to say to kind of what you said how does just like kind of smiles and being kind draws people to church when it feels like a huge God, like kind of in a way, I guess sorry to use my own words in this. God has made such a huge change of draw to the church. How does being kind do? Well, when the Holy Spirit fills within us, we are beacons of light for God. So any sort of kindness or gesture, or even using quotes from the Bible without even mentioning quotes from the Bible, or even giving some word of advice from someone from what you have learned being within the church and the wisdom of our fathers and the monks and so on. Any little piece can plant a seed within somebody to draw them near, to where God can fill within their heart and can draw them into the church. It is people. God has used people. God has used all the prophets to prophesy the coming of Christ, to warn us of the first coming of Christ. He's always used people. It is not just a energy flow that draws people near. It is people. He fills it within us and uses us to draw others near to him so his children can come back to him. That's the point I wanted to make.
That's a good point. Anything else?
I didn't meet any Orthodox people until I went to an Orthodox church. It wasn't the Orthodox people that drew me, but maybe I'm an exception and not the rule.
No, I think it depends on this on a lot of things. I think it comes down to the fact that it says two things. One, that means we have to do a lot more work if that wasn't the reason, right? Because it should be that. It should be people in that sense that bring you to, it should be Orthodox people that bring you to Orthodoxy. That's kind of part of what I'm saying with the saying we need to live that way in society. So society goes, oh, maybe we should check this out, right? Father, Seraphim Masarov famously, says, "Take inner peace, 1,000 around you will be saved." Part of that also is due to the fact that 1,000 people around you will be saved, and they see an example of what that looks like, right? We need a lot more people that are like that live like that out in the world. That's what I was trying to talk about with the second thing, because not everybody can go out there and recruit and go out there and talk to people about the faith, right? We can't just have our version of a bicycle, 2 kids on bicycles, okay? We can't have that 100%. We can certainly try, but we got to have more than that. We have to extend more than that. We have to Christianize the culture. That's really what it boiled down to, okay? Because because not enough people are coming for that reason, and a lot more people are coming for the reason you came. You were looking into this because of other things that happened. A couple weeks ago, I asked this question: why did people come to Orthodoxy? What was the draw? And they all had basically sort of a similar answer of saying, I was looking for something that was real, or something that was true, or something to help me figure out what was going on in my life that, in a sense, trying to answer this calling and such like that God had put in my life.
If I could have set down this question and left it alone, I would have. It was an internal compulsion to keep on searching, and that brought me down this rabbit hole of finding all this stuff, and ultimately to Orthodoxy and finding out this history that's all of that. I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't meet my first Orthodox person until I was already in the church.
Yeah. And that's my point, right? Yeah. Like, it's that part of it that's in us. Because the thing about it is, it's in every single person. Just some people have put it away, right? But it kind of goes hand in hand to what I just said a few minutes ago, right? The community has to be strong, right? In that sense, because like we talked about, you weren't here, but I'll tell you to go back and listen to the last classes that we talked about, one of our early classes on this, when we talked about the parable of the parable of the sower of the seeds, right? Like the different types of seeds, right? Some have to be cared for, right? Everyone has a potential to be a good seed, but you have to still care. Like, you can't just leave the seed there and just hope for the best, right? It's like I had that comment earlier on about the whole, you can't just build a church and hope for the best, right? Yes, you're going to bring those people in, but you're not going to hold them there unless there's something for them to feel like there's more to it than that, right? Like, we talked a little bit about this kind of in our thing beforehand, before the class. You were actually in the country of Georgia, right? You're doing the services. You're not hearing those words in English, right? That's a big argument why English is so important to have in church services in this country, because there are parishes here in this country that do their entire services in Slavonic or their entire services in Greek.
My parish was English speaking. They started an English speaking in 2 of the parishes in the main capital city.
Okay.
So when I was searching out, I found that.
And I'm sure one of the reasons they did it, sorry to interrupt, but I'm sure one of the reasons they did that is because probably for the Americans that were working there, or for people that were in the military and such. I'm sure you probably had a population of that, correct?
No, not really. There's just a lot of people. Like, English is kind of the lingua franca of the world. So if you don't speak this specific language or that specific language, usually you can meet on English. So for all of the expatriates from all over the world who are living in Georgia, they have they've decided that they got the blessing from the bishop there for this priest to start a parish that is English speaking.
That was right. So But the vast majority of the parishes there are not English.
Correct.
So did you walk into any of those other churches?
Yes, I did.
And did you understand what was going on during the service?
Only in so much as I had heard it in English at the other service.
Or you saw the structure of it?
Yeah.
And go, okay, that must... Like, for example, I could use it as a good example. St. Anthony's Monastery in Florence, Arizona, right? The entire liturgy is in Greek. Okay? Now, I don't speak very much Greek. I can speak enough to get in trouble. Okay? But I can walk into there. Somebody who grew up in the church, but also at the same time is a priest. So obviously I know the structure of the services. But even before then, before I was even going to seminary, even before I was married, okay, I went. And I could know exactly what part of the service they're at because I know the structure of the services just from going to church, right? A certain sense of that is always going to be the case, where you just know that's the flow, that's and whatnot. But if it's not taken. If it's one of the reasons why that can work in some places, but you said there was a need for English speaking in that country, right? That's one of the things that America has done. That's one of the arguments the OCA makes versus the other jurisdictions in this country is that all churches need to be English speaking because the vast majority of people seeking out orthodoxy are not Greeks, are not Russians, are not Georgians, the other kind of Georgian, okay, are not Romanians, are not, because they already are used to it, right? And so they have to feel that level of comfort, right, in that sense of it. So it's one of the reasons, again, that it's so important and vital that the community makes it very clear that the people that do come in here are welcome and are truly welcome. And are not just welcome because they want good numbers and they want a lot of people and let's chalk it up to the growth and stuff like that, right? It's sort of in this sense of it saying, okay, this is like sports reference number 8 or 9 or 10. I've lost count, okay? It's, you've been handed a first round draft. Don't let them get bust. Don't let it become a bust, right? Don't waste that guy's career. Don't bring in Kirk Cousins to the Vikings and think, and waste that guy's career, Although he's not a Viking anymore. But still, you've been given this. Take it and do something with it. These people are coming into the church. It's our job in the church. They come into our church. It's our job to keep them here. Like I tell people all the time, I say, look, it's not just our job to sit there and go, okay, great, you're here. Glory to God. It's, how do we keep you? How do we keep you here? And making adjustments as we need to make those adjustments. One of the things we talked about with the greeters specifically, right? We formed a team of greeters. When I first got here, it was Anthony. And Anthony would give them something to fill out when they were back in the narthex. Now we formed a team and they're training and they're learning how to do things and they're trying to be that welcoming aspect. That's why there's 2 of them on top of that too. And Anthony sort of shadows them, so to speak, so that they kind of make their adjustments and things like that. But eventually it'll be self-managing. It'll work on its own and it won't be an issue, right? But this is also a parish that's going through growing pains, right? New priest, been here for a year. So you're going to have those situations that happen, But at its core, at the very core of it, certain things have to be there from the get-go or all this type of stuff is meaningless. Right? We can't waste the draft pick. We can't waste that. God's given us those people. We have to be thankful that he's given us. And then we have to make sure that they know it very clearly. We want you here. I don't just want, I don't like the fact, I had 5 visitors today. No, I have 5 new people that I generally want to see back again. What do I got to do to get them to come back? Anyway, anything else? Anybody? It's been kind of long, so should we go ahead and end now? All right, let's say a prayer and then we'll end it. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. It is truly meet to bless you, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure and the Mother of our God. More honorable than the cherubim and more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without defilement you gave birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify you. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.